Defense Minister An Gyubek and his Japanese counterpart Shinjiro Koizumi have agreed to resume joint drills after an almost 10-year halt. We cover this agreement and more on Press Perspective today. Welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, February 3rd here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. South Korea was recently engaged in a series of defense discussions, both here at home and over in neighboring Japan. For more on this, I have Fabian Kretschmer with German press agency DPA here in the studio. Fabian, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Ban Kil Joo at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy with us live. Professor Ban, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hello, good to be here.
Right, Fabian, let's start here in the studio. So as I mentioned in the clip before the start of this talk, the defense ministers of South Korea and Japan held talks last week. What was addressed and what was agreed on?
Yeah, so they both met in the Japanese city of Yokosuka, and previously they met actually in South Korea in September, so they always rotate on which country will host them. And basically both defense ministers decided to upgrade cooperation. There were two concrete outcomes. One was that Japan and South Korea agreed to hold joint naval search and rescue drills. And the second concrete outcome was that they would work together in incorporating artificial intelligence and unmanned weapon systems. Now we will probably hear more from expert Professor Ban, but for me the significance of this is that Japan and South Korea are choosing quite a pragmatic cooperation, despite the historical dispute that both have. I mean, South Korea was always feeling, not too great to get too close to Japan because of the historical dispute. That was basically limiting the cooperation, but now it seems that the geopolitical reality has basically forced a new pragmatism. And South Korea and Japan, both democracies, share similar values, and basically they need to cooperate closer because they're several challenges in the region. I think North Korea is one of them, but then there's also China as the elephant in the room. So, for example, in the eyes of Beijing, they don't like to see that Seoul and Tokyo inch too close together. But that's what it is. And of course, in the eyes of the US, it's very happy news that Seoul and Tokyo are cooperating more closely.
Right. Professor Ban, as Fabian just mentioned, the two defense ministers also agreed to resume joint defense drills that were halted about a decade ago. What, Professor Ban, is the significance of resumption, that is, of these drills? And for the sake of context, could you tell us why they were halted in the first place?
Well, the bilateral relationship between Seoul and Tokyo has been tricky, making bilateral military exercises hard, unlike multilateral or trilateral exercises. South Korea, the United States, and Japan have conducted trilateral military exercises as part of an effort to offset North Korea's nuclear threat under the title of Freedom Edge. For instance, in September 2025, South Korea hosted the Freedom Edge, which took place at sea off Jeju Island. Despite this high level of trilateral exercises, South Korea and Japan were reluctant to conduct bilateral exercises due to their long-standing military dialogue, which was affected by strained diplomatic relations. Meanwhile, as you noted, at the defense ministers' meeting, South Korea and Japan agreed to resume SAREX, search and rescue exercise, which had been halted since 2018. SAREX is defined as a low level of exercise compared with Freedom Edge because the former is inherently non-military related to humanitarian assistance. Despite the fact that SAREX is a low-degree exercise, Seoul and Tokyo have stayed away from these exercises, which are based on a bilateral architecture. In particular, the two catalytic factors led to halting SAREX since 2018. First, the issue of Japan's maritime self-defense forces flagged with the rising sun, which symbolized the Imperial Japan. And second, the incident of Japan Maritime Self-Defense Forces maritime patrol aircraft. When it comes to the flag, in 2018, South Korea asked Japan not to display the flag of the rising sun on the ship, which was expected to participate in the fleet review hosted by South Korea. but Japan did not comply with South Korea's request and decided not to attend the fleet review. Regarding the maritime aircraft incident, South Korea and Japan were confrontational, as Japan claimed that South Korea's destroyer tracked Japan's maritime aircraft in the East Sea with its radar. So, resuming SAREX shows that shuttle diplomacy between the two leaders can contribute to overcoming this catalytic the factors which is confrontational incidents between the two militaries and evolve their cooperation more intensively in various agendas, including military cooperation.
Right then, keeping in mind the bilateral defense partnership agreed upon last week, Professor Ban, do you believe the Trump administration's defense strategy, focusing on national or homeland security, is perhaps encouraging its allies to strengthen their own defense partnerships with each other? And if that is the case, Professor Ban, how is South Korea faring thus far?
Honestly, it is true that the Trump administration highlights burden sharing and burden shift to its allies more intensively than its previous administrations. In this vein, South Korea is being recognized as a model ally by the Trump administration, mainly because South Korea proactively decided to increase its military budget to 3.5% of its GDP. Moreover, the United States recognizes South Korea as a reciprocally profitable partner in a situation where the alliance formula is converted from shared threats to the balance of interests. That explains why South Korea and the United States have successfully drawn the alliance modernization roadmap, which is shown in the 2025 joint fact sheet. More specifically, the Trump administration has recently completed its diplomatic and security architecture by revealing its NSS National Security Strategy in December last year, and then laying out its NDS National Defense Strategy in January this year. These two documents show how the Trump administration thinks of burden sharing with its allies and partners. In particular, how to redraw America's grand strategy needs to be explored in order to figure out the scale of burden sharing. I would say that the reconfigured grand strategy under the second Trump administration can be defined as a Western Hemisphere-led sphere of influence strategy with offshore balancing in Asia, which is far from its long-standing hegemony strategy. In more detail, America's grand strategy under the Trump administration can be explained by three key domains. First, putting most efforts in seizing the Western Hemisphere. Second, a low degree of offshore balancing in Asia under the policy of burden sharing. And third, reluctance to engage in Europe under the focus of burden shift. Based on this reconfigured America's grand strategy, South Korea's burden becomes clearer. In 2025 NSS, South Korea is designated as one of the two key allies with Japan to assume its duties to deter China's threat in the first island chain. Meanwhile, in the 2026 NDS, South Korea is designated as a primary actor to counter North Korea. The reason why the United States attempts to make South Korea be more responsible, not only on the Korean Peninsula, but also in the Pacific, is that it should pay tremendous attention to seize the Western Hemisphere under the policy of teeth through strength. This posture is unprecedented regarding the trajectory of America's grand strategy. So its ripple effect seems to be big around the world, as well as in the region and on the Korean Peninsula.
Right, and following the release of the Trump administration's latest national defense posture, Fabian, earlier last week, the senior defense policymaker, Elbridge Colby, was here to discuss, among other matters with South Korea, of course, its ambitions for nuclear-powered submarines. What more can you share with us on that front?
Yeah, actually, Elbridge Colby, he's well known within the East Asia community as a China hawk. I mean, he basically holds the position that the US should contain China and should also focus their resources on the China threat, so to speak. That's his view. And what I find significant is that since taking his post under the Trump administration, this was his first overseas trip. He basically chose Korea as his first destination, and that already gives you an idea how significant South Korea is for the Trump administration. And he also called South Korea a model ally, model ally. There were many topics that he talked here, and he had really a high agenda. He met with the foreign minister and defense minister, as far as I know, and several other high-profile people also within this government here. He talked about the transfer of OPCON, so transfer of wartime operation. Now, if there should be a war in the Korean Peninsula, actually the US military leadership would have the operational control, and this will be shifted to the South Korean side. And this is also in the interest of the Lee Jae-myung government. They want to push for it, and now details are being discussed. And if you look at Elbridge Colby's statements, he also welcomes that. He wants basically to have South Korea, wants that South Korea has a bigger role in security and deterrence here on the Korean Peninsula. And the second topic that you already mentioned is that South Korea wants to produce and operate nuclear submarines. That is a sensitive issue, and again, I think the US side seems relatively welcoming. Why? Because they want South Korea to have a bigger role here in terms of security. That means less financial spending, less financial burden from the perspective of the US. But I think there's one potential conflict of interest. Colby, as I said, is a China hawk, and he wants basically also that South Korea plays a bigger role in getting involved in the geopolitical conflict between the US and China. And I think that is one thing that South Korea has no interest in, because Lee Jae-myung, as I said, he's not only trying to improve ties with Japan and the US, but also with China. He basically wants to please all sides, and I think South Korea has no interest in getting drawn too deep into a geopolitical rivalry.
Right, but as you mentioned, Fabian, South Korea does have an interest in regaining wartime operational control within the administration, within the term, that is, of the Lee Jae-myung administration. Professor Ban, how feasible is this plan to regain wartime operational control of its forces?
Well, when it comes to the recent strategic posture of both South Korea and the United States and the alliance modernization agreed by both sides, the transfer of wartime operational control from the United States to South Korea is more feasible than any moment in history of this journey. In particular, the Trump administration's burden-sharing concept is harmonized with the transfer of OPCON. In this sense, harmonized policies and strategies between South Korea and the United States serve as a golden opportunity for South Korea to retake OPCON. Thus, the Rock administration pays tremendous attention to accelerating the process of OPCON transfer with an aim to retake it before 2030. To that end, on 20 January this year, Rock Ministry of Defense held the first meeting to evaluate the OPCON transfer process. It seems that South Korea sees the golden moment for achieving the goal of retaking OPCON, but at the same time, the key aspects should be taken into consideration as well. First, condition-based OPCON transfer, and second, enhancing security under the more consolidated combined posture after the OPCON transfer. When it comes to condition-based OPCON transfer, this process is not time-based but condition-based. So the three-step process should be well made. South Korea is eager to complete the second step, which is FOC, full operational capability, within this year. Regarding the enhanced combined posture in the post-OPCON transfer era, the end status of OPCON transfer should lead to bolstering security rather than weakening it by maximizing the combined coordinated posture between South Korea and the United States. In this sense, although the OPCON transfer is more feasible than ever, it is not going to be easy without coordinated efforts and enhanced security readiness. In particular, South Korea and the United States should maintain coordinated strategic and policy goals in the next 4 years without a hitch in an aim to achieve this goal.
Right, it sounds like it's going to be a work in progress then. Fabian, moving forward, South Korea reportedly remains as the world's fifth strongest military power this year as well. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular finding and its broader implications?
Yeah, so every year the Global Firepower, that's an independent US-based defense data website, publishes the so-called Military Strength Index. And that is a ranking that basically ranks countries by its military power. And conventional military power, I should say, because it does not take into account the nuclear bombs, for example, that some countries possess, but it would rather count criteria such as the manpower of the military, the logistics, the equipment, and the defense spending, the budget basically, and then it comes up with the ranking. And you can say that South Korea, given its size, is definitely punching above its weight. It's on 5th place. I mean, the first 4 places are quite predictable with the US, Russia, China, and India, but then it is South Korea, and no other European country, for example, featuring that high. I mean, after South Korea, you have then also UK and France, and then Japan, etc. But my home country, Germany, would not be in the top 10. So yeah, South Korea is a military power, and maybe that also reflects the security situation here in the Korean Peninsula. Technically, South Korea is still at war, and I think it has to spend a lot and develop its military. What else is there to say? I would say that one big challenge for South Korea's military power is actually the demographic challenges, because the older the South Korea gets, the less soldiers you will have, and I think this at some point could maybe even then decrease the military power of South Korea.
Right, hence the bilateral cooperation between South Korea and Japan with regard to AI in defense then. Professor Ban, staying here on the Korean Peninsula, but talking about North Korea, its 9th ruling party Congress is expected to take place this month. What should South Korea be keeping its eyes on, Professor Ban?
Well, Pyongyang seems to take advantage of the fast-changing international order boosted by the Trump administration in an effort to maximize the gains by North Korea's ruling party Congress. To that end, 3 things draw attention. First, attention is paid to how the process to designate Kim Joo-ae as Kim Jong-un's successor is taking place in this Congress. In particular, whether Kim Joo-ae shows up in this Congress and or where she is located in this place draw attention to figure out this succession process. Second, a scale of military trade is one of the attentions because Pyongyang has demonstrated enhanced strategic weapons through the parades. Those weapons help us figure out how Pyongyang bolsters its military posture and how Pyongyang cooperates with others like Russia in an effort to modernize its conventional and the strengthened nuclear weapons. Finally, but most importantly, the initiative to enhance North Korea's nuclear posture draws attention in a situation where Kim Jong-un informed his intention to unveil the plan on simultaneous development of nuclear and conventional weapons in September 2025. This initiative seems to be clarified through this 9th Workers' Party Congress. This plan is aimed at not simply simultaneous development, but integration between nuclear and conventional weapons. In this regard, this plan can be defined as North Korea version of CNI, conventional and nuclear integration, in the sense that South Korea and the United States are trying to advance the concept of CNI as part of the NCG, Nuclear Consultative Group. North Korea's version of CNI seems to aim at achieving the end goal of its long-standing nuclear program, which is a recognized nuclear power in the world, so-called a status as a nuclear armed state. Moreover, this plan is expected to greatly enhance its nuclear operational capabilities, which means Pyongyang could seize both nuclear and conventional front lines in the wider region as well as on the Korean Peninsula.
And against the backdrop of such concerns, Fabian, there are quite a number of pundits who claim that North Korea's Kim Jong-un may engage in talks if offered economic as well as political rewards for perhaps, and I'm quoting, limited denuclearization steps. What have you been hearing, Fabian?
Well, I'm quite skeptical about it. I mean, we know, for example, that KCNA, the North Korean news agency, they have quoted Kim Jong-un that during the party congress, the country will declare the next stage plans for further bolstering up the country's nuclear war deterrent. Kim Jong-un is very committed to his nuclear program. He has seen also geopolitically with the recent developments that countries who don't have nuclear weapons, they can easily immediately fall prey to bigger powers. And let's say Venezuela was the last example. But I think in general, it would be hard to convince Kim Jong-un to even undergo limited steps. But I mean, I would say you can still hope for it. But right now, North Korea is in a sweet spot. It gets quite a lot of foreign currency by China and Russia. And maybe the international community would have to offer something that North Korea really needs. Right now, the incentive for North Korea is not so high to really make concessions, I would say. So I'm quite skeptical about it.
Right. This is an impromptu question, Professor Ban, but quite a number of pundits, Professor Ban, believe that North Korea's Kim Jong-un may be coaxed to having dialogue with President Donald Trump in April when President Trump meets with Xi Jinping in Beijing. What are your thoughts regarding such speculation, such prospects?
Basically, the feasibility is based upon the formula and then trade-off. And then so Trump administration need to think over what the United States is able to provide North Korea through the bilateral summit. And then without any carrots, Kim Jong-un is not going to be seated at the negotiation table. So both sides are going to be deeper in the formula negotiation game, actually. So the negotiation game is going to determine the feasibility of the summit talks between Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Right. So they'll only be possible if there are some tangible carrots on the table then. Professor Ban, thank you so much for your insight today.
Thanks for having me.
And Fabian here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching. Return same time tomorrow with more panel discussion.